And we're back, and we are moving on to chapter 36 of When the Legends Die. And when we left off, again, we've left off where Tom is a star on the rodeo circuit, but as only Tom would want it. He doesn't go for the titles, he doesn't go for the wins, he just goes to purge his demons. There's all these different legends that he's the devil's brother or the devil's cousins, and they're having a fight and an argument, and remember, one legend is that the devil turns himself into a bronc, and that Tom's determined to ride every single bronc till he finds the devil. And there's other cases where there's all these legends that have grown up because he's become one of the most legendary riders on the circuit. And with that legend, there's so much myth and so much mystery. And one of them even asked, well, how many championships did he win? He never won a championship because he didn't want to. He didn't need to. His whole point with justice here, his whole point in writing is, again, just that's the only time he feels alive. So he keeps going and competing because that's the one time he feels alive is in the rodeo ring. The only time he's in control. And so we're moving on then to chapter 36. As the last chapter has been several years, about maybe 7-8 years that he's been on the circuit. He's lost track. Everyone's lost track. He doesn't remember how many rides he's had. It's just that he just measures it from one arena to the next, and moves on then to chapter 36 on page 151. It was almost noon when he wakened, and for a few minutes he didn't know where he was. All cities sounded pretty much alike, especially from a hotel room. Los Angeles and New York had a beat, a throb he felt beyond the noises actually heard. Chicago had a confusion of beats. Denver and Dallas lacked the throb. He lay listening and heard the sounds of construction across the street. This must be New York. Somehow he always picked a New York hotel just across the street from a new building going up or an old one coming down. In Philadelphia, he always seemed to choose a hotel where they were tearing up an old street or putting down a new one. This was New York. He remembered now. He rode the Garden last night, a white bronc called Forked Lightning. There weren't many white horses in the bucking stirrups, mainly because they weren't supposed to have the fight or the stamina. Forked Lightning was plenty mean, though. Gave him a battle. And tonight he would ride a bronc they called Skyrocket, a big roan, maybe the same one they called Lights Out a few months ago. They kept changing names. Skyrocket tonight, tomorrow a dun they called Suicide. Then he'd pack his gear, get in his car and drive, sleep in another hotel, and ride in another show. He stared at the ceiling of the room. It was sky blue. The drapes were darker blue, the furniture still darker. Blue, the female color. He was surprised to think of that. He hadn't thought of the old way in a long time. Blue for the South, the gentle, the female. Black for the North, the harsh, the male. He put the thought away from him. Blue was blue. He yawned and stretched and felt the deep old aches. His right knee throbbed and the knee that was smashed in Denver 6 years ago. Or was it 7? No matter. There was a dull ache in his left shoulder, the stiff one. The aches you live with, but neither of his collarbones ached this morning. His right ankle was sore, just a hot shower would loosen it up and somehow ease the other aches. He got up and showered and shaved and dressed. He went downstairs and on his way to the dining room, stopped at the newsstand and bought an evening paper. He leaped through it after he had given his order and found the feature story on the inside page. The scowling photograph with the slit mouth, the crooked nose, the wide cheekbones, the scar across the chin. The headline read, "The Killer Rides Again." The first few lines were so familiar you could have read them with his eyes shut. Tom Black is back in the garden with the rodeo, and the crowds are waiting for him to kill another horse. Black, a full-blooded Indian, is known to rodeo buffs as Killer Tom, Devil Tom, and an assortment of other grim nicknames, and he's earned them all. A veteran bronc rider, Tom Black, has ridden 9 horses to death in the rodeo arena, and at every performance the spectators expect him to kill another one. The story went on for another half column, full of vivid details, which the greater part was only half true. Tom had read the story 100 times. Apparently the rodeo publicity man kept a mimeograph to hand out to reporters. The waitress brought the steak and eggs he ordered and he put the paper aside and ate. Actually, he had been involved in the death of only 6 horses, counting the one at Aztec, and that one wasn't even in the records, but several other broncs had to be retired, wind broken or spirit broken after he rode them. He had to admit that to himself at least. He finished his meal, paid his check, and went out in the street. He walked aimlessly until his right knee began to throb. Then he caught a bus and rode to the end of the line, far uptown. He got off, found a bench at the end of a tiny patch of fenced grass, and watched the pigeons. Two small boys were chasing the pigeons, and when they flew, they made a whistling sound that reminded Tom of the doves they used to pick up waste grain in the corrals that sit at the edge of the barn at the place in San Juan. Red used to try to shoot those doves with his 30-30 rifle, but so far as Tom knew, Red never killed a dove. Mayo used to say Red couldn't hit the horse inside of a barn with the door shut, and Mayo probably was right. Red wasn't much of a marksman. The pigeons flew and circled and came back, and the boys chased them again. Finally, the boys, tired of this game, and came and gawked at Tom. One shouted, "He is too. He's that Indian that kills horses at the rodeo." The other one shouted, "That's a lie. He's Indian. Where's his bow and arrow?" The first one cried, "Stupid. Indians use guns just like anybody else. If I had my gun, I'd shoot him right now. Bang, bang, powie." And the other one came up to Tom and demanded, "What's your name? Are you an Indian?" Tom ignored him. The pigeons came back, and the boys went to chase them again. Tom got up and went up to the bus stop and took the next bus downtown. He could have gone to the arena like the other riders, but he preferred to be alone. The others spent the whole afternoon at the arena just talking. Talking business, talking horses, talking women. He had heard all that talk long ago. He got off the bus, walked back to the hotel, and sat in the lobby for an hour. And the hotel lobby was the only place you could be alone in a crowd, alone and unnoticed. Then it was almost supper time. His supper time, since they always ate early. He went to the dining room and ate another steak. They left a call at the desk, went to his room, and lay down and slept. When the phone call roused him and the girl said it was 7:30, he got up, showered again to ease the aches and the stiffness of that right knee, and sat relaxing for another half hour. Then he went over to the garden. The night show was getting underway. He got his gear and made his way over to the chutes. The bull riding was going on. Bull riding left him cold. Brahma bulls were mean buckers, but the rider had a surgical to hold on to. Even at that, bull riding was at least half a matter of luck. And that cobble and the surgical meant the whole thing seemed absurd to him. He began checking his gear, cinches, stirrup, rein, boots, and chaps. The bull riding clambered and clanked to a conclusion. The announcer made his spiel and the trick riding started. The girls who did the trick riding might just as well have been Broadway showgirls, except they had learned to ride a horse and do stunts on a special saddle. He had seen all their stunts, he knew all their faces, whether he had ever seen them before or not. Finally, the last of the girls left the arena, and the bronc riding was the next event. The broncs were in the chutes. Riders and helpers were saddling them in a babble of talk, laughter, and good-natured curses. Tom had drawn tonight's number 3 ride, 2 others ahead of him. He always took his time about saddling, not liking to wait too long before he rode. He went over to chute number 3 as the number 1 rider was announced. A helper was there holding the big roan's head. Tom stepped out of the chute runway, saddle in hand, and let it down easy, cinches dangling. The roan flinched, but didn't even try to hunch its back, saving its strength. Some broncs tried to fight the saddle. Others saved the fight for the rider. The helper reached between the chute's planks with the wire and fished for the front cinch and got it, handed it to Tom. He snugged the front cinch while the helper fished for the other ring and on the back cinch. Tom took it, jerked the buck cinch tight to force the roan to let out its breath. It wheezed and eased for an instant, and Tom hauled up the front cinch a couple of notches before the roan could catch another breath. They let out the back cinch, kept it just tight enough so the saddle wouldn't rock. The crowd was roaring. The number 1 rider, a newcomer who had made a spectacular ride last night, apparently was doing all right for himself again. Tom didn't even look up, but he heard the stomp of the broncs' hooves, the groaning wheezes, the slap of the rider's chaps. Then the horn blew, the crowd cheered and whistled. Tom glanced upon them and saw the rider pivot out of the pickup man horse, grin at the crowd, and wave his hat. Then he unbuckled his chaps, stepped out, slung his chaps over his arm, and came back towards the chutes, almost strutting. He was good, he knew it. A boy on the way up. The picket man chivied the bronc towards the exit, and the announcer started his spiel about the number 2 rider. Tom shook his saddle, testing it, and took up the front cinch another notch. He rosined his chaps, remembering when he was a boy on his way up, when the crowd cheered and whistled and stomped for him, when he was riding for points, a long time ago. He checked his spurs, dried his hands on his shirt, and got ready to ease himself down into the saddle. The gate opened at number 2 chute, went out in a hammerhead black with a rider in a yellow shirt. The crowd began to roar. Tom let himself down into the saddle. The roan didn't even hump its back. He felt for his stirrups, felt the hard curve of the metal through the thin soles of his boots. He sensed the taut muscles of the bronc beneath his calves, hard, tense, ready to explode into action. He dried his hands again and glanced at the number 2 rider. The hammer-headed black was ducking and side-jumping, and the rider had too short a rein and couldn't seem to slip it. A helper laid the bucking strap across Tom's horse's back, fished the buckle and fastened it loosely, ready to jerk tight. He handed up the rein on the left side. "No," Tom snapped, "the other side." "I forgot," the helper apologized and brought the rein around for Tom's unorthodox right hand. The crowd groaned. The number 2 rider was in trouble. His short rein had jerked him loose in the saddle. The bronc knew it, lunged viciously, side-jumped, and the rider was thrown. The picket men closed in, drove the bronc towards the exit, and the unlucky rider slowly got to his feet, shaking his head. He dusted himself and walked unhappily back towards the chutes. The announcer was bellowing, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, here comes a rider you all know, at least by reputation. Some call him the Killer, some call him Black Death. He has a whole string of names like that. He's earned every one of them." The crowd had begun to cheer. The announcer waited for the cheers to ease off. Then they went on. "I don't have to tell you any more about him, I see. Anyway, here he is, coming out of chute number 3. I give you Tom Black on Skyrocket." The crowd roared again, louder than before, then tensed into silence. Tom got the signal. The bucking strap was jerked tighter on the roan's flanks. Tom set his spurs well forward, leaned back against the rein, took a deep breath and let it out. He nodded to the gateman and the gate swung open. The roan called Skyrocket went out with a lunge and a bellow. Reins taut and spurs raking, Tom Black began his ride. He had made this ride 1,000 times. Skyrocket was a pattern bucker. 3 lunges, a side jump, a half spin, then 3 lunges again. Tom rode with the rhythm, concentrating on punishment with his spurs and being brutal with the reins at every side jump and spin. 3 times the roan followed the pattern, lunge, side jump, spin. Then the punishment made it frantic. It tried to duck left, shaking its head, bellowing. Tom hauled its head around and lunged again, then tried to duck again. Tom shifted his weight for leverage, then a stab of pain shot through his right knee and streaked to his ankle. In fury at the pain, Tom jerked the bronc's head up and around by sheer strength. The ankle went numb, and to keep from losing the stirrup, he jabbed his foot deeper. The roan squealed and came up, pawing in air. It reared and danced, still trying to spin left, and again he jerked its head around to the right. Neck bowed, it came down fighting, bunched in for another lunge. His right leg now numb from knee to ankle, Tom was jerked forward as the roan struck the ground, head down. It lunged, and he powered its head around as it left the ground. Off balance, it seemed to tangle its feet in the air. Tom felt it begin to fall, still fighting for its feet. He knew it was going, knew he had to get clear. He kicked his left foot free of the stirrup, but his right foot didn't respond. He grabbed the pommel of the saddle with his left hand and tried to thrust himself clear, but he's still in the saddle as the roan came down with a crash on its right side, rolling with its own momentum. Tom felt one crushing blow across his hips before his head struck the arena. Then the whole world seemed to explode in a burst of light and pain, then darkness and nothing. He had a brief span of semi-consciousness before they moved him, enough to know the sensation of floating in a choppy sea of pain and hearing voices all around him. His head was a throbbing balloon, and his vision was blurred. Spasms of nausea wrenched at him. Then they gave him injections, and the sea of pain began to quiet. Even the pain in his chest had almost stopped his breathing. Then he was unconscious again. He never knew how they got him on the stretcher, put the stretcher in the ambulance, and took him to the hospital. He never knew how thin was his thread of life for a night and a day and another night. So finally, Tom's had an accident in the arena where a horse literally reared up, fell backwards on top of him because his leg was caught. Because of his injured leg, it was numb, and he couldn't get it off the stirrup. And so normally he'd be able to jump off, but the leg was numb. It tightened up. And so he was trapped under the horse, and the horse rolled on top of him. Chapter 38, page 157. Most of the first week he existed in the half-world of the critically hurt, where there was neither night nor day, time nor reality, but only the overlapping periods of confused consciousness and dreams and nightmares. His body fought its battles quite apart from his mind. The transfusions, the injections, the x-rays, and the merciful surgery were performed in flesh and blood and bone, temporarily cut off from the normal processes of awareness. He aroused enough from time to time to sense his hospital surroundings and feel the deep, insistent throb of pain in his head and the dull remote pain elsewhere. But reality never quite overcame the dreams and nightmares. Dreams of boyhood, of his mother in the mountains, of the reservation, Red Dillon's place in the backcountry rodeos, and always the dreams came to a chilling nightmare of falling. of being trapped in the saddle on a bronc that was forever falling but never landing. Slowly his vitality reasserted itself. As his awareness increased, he was restless and resentful. The stern activity of the ward rasped at his nerves. When he was lucid enough to enforce his demands, they moved him to a private room 6 floors above the street. There, the first morning of his second week, he wakened at dawn and saw the flame of sunrise in a small patch of sky beyond his window. He watched it, and the memory of another dawn came to him. The dawn where he and his mother, on the flight from Pagosa, bathed in the icy pool of a brook and sat naked on the rocks and sang the chant to a new day. The rhythm of that chant throbbed in his memory like his own heartbeat for a few moments. Then he tried to move, and pain stabbed at his chest and hips, and bitterness rose in his throat like his own gorge. He was no longer a boy or a breech-cloud Indian. He was a grown man in another world, a bronc rider trapped by his own injuries in a world of pain and helplessness. He was still rankling when a nurse came in. She was plump and had coppery hair and blue eyes, looked to be in her 30s. She said, "Well, good morning, how are we today?" And he immediately resented her ready smile and a bubbly stare. He frowned at her and didn't answer. She lowered the window shade and started to put a thermometer in his mouth. "Put up that shade," he ordered. "Well, but the sun is right in your eyes." "I like the sun, put it up." She laughed at him, raised the shade again, then took his temperature and his pulse. She straightened his bed, deft and efficient, then said, "You must be starved. What would taste good for breakfast?" "I'm not hungry." "How about poached eggs?" "I said I'm not hungry." "Oh, you will be. Nothing tastes good in a hospital. But you have to eat, and poached eggs go down easy." She filled his water glass and left the room. A little later, she came back with a tray of toast, poached eggs, and coffee, arranged them on the bed table, saw that he took 2 capsules, happy pills to sweeten your disposition, and went away. The coffee tasted the way burning hay smelled. He had a flash of memory of the night he burned the barn. Then he remembered the strong, bitter coffee Mayo used to make and the bite of Mayo's chili. The whole remembrance of that place on the San Juan came back to him. He thrust the memories away and ate the toast and the eggs, hungry as the nurses said he would be. Then he slept. The next morning, when the copperhead nurse came in and asked him how he was, he demanded, "What's your name?" "Mary Redmond." She moved to lower the window shade. "Leave the shade alone. Where are you from?" "Massachusetts." She came back to his bedside. "That's New England, isn't it?" It was an accusation. "About as New England as you can get." She put the thermometer in his mouth and counted his pulse. When she took the thermometer again, he said, "I used to have a mealy-mouthed school teacher who looked a little like you and talked like you. She was from New England." She laughed. "You're talkative this morning. You must be feeling better." She began making his bed. When she had finished and folded the blanket across the foot of the bed, she asked, "Where did you know this charming school teacher from New England?" "In Colorado on the reservation." "Oh." She went to get him a fresh glass of water. When she came back, he repeated sharply, "On the reservation." I heard that the first time. "Well?" "Look, Chief, you just as well put away your tomahawk and take the feathers out of your hair. This is a hospital, not a reservation, and you're just another man to me. Anything else I can do for you?" "No, leave me alone." That afternoon, Dr. Ferguson, the surgeon, came in to see him. Dr. Ferguson was a tall, lean man with a lean face and a clipped voice which Tom remembered vaguely, but this was the first time he had been well enough to ask questions. When the surgeon was taking his pulse, Tom asked, "Ribs?" The surgeon nodded. "How many?" "Several. Follow my hand." He moved his hand from side to side in front of Tom's face. Tom followed with his eyes for a moment, then closed them, dizzy. "Well, how's the nausea? You thrown up today?" "No." "Well, what else besides the ribs?" The surgeon watched him for a moment, and then said, "A lung puncture, a deep concussion, a broken femur, and a broken pelvis." "Is that all?" "Isn't that enough? Did you want a broken back, too?" "Well, how long will I be laid up?" "Till your pelvis knits. 6 weeks or so. We've pinned your femur. That's the big bone in your thigh. You can walk again as soon as your pelvis knits." "Well, how soon can I ride again?" "Well, never, if you take my advice." "Well, I didn't ask for advice." "Well, you got it. As far as the injuries go, the lung puncture is healing properly. You're almost over the effects of the concussion, but broken bones don't knit overnight, as you must know. I see from your x-rays you've had quite a few in the past, but you seem to heal fast and your bones probably knit fast." "They do." "Well, in another 6 weeks, you should be able to walk out of here. Beyond that, it's up to you." "I'll walk out and I'll ride again." Dr. Ferguson shrugged and left the room. That night, Tom had the dreams and nightmares again. He wakened and tried to remember that last ride. All he could remember that was right there in the nightmare, being trapped in the saddle and the big rope falling, and never coming down. All right, we'll be finishing up the last chapters of the third section as we're just got a little like one last part of the book left. And we'll be finishing up next week before we finish up the year. And just rounding up then again, we've seen Tom's had this accident that almost killed him. But even with the damage, he's still determined. No one's going to get in his way. No one's going to stop him. He's going to get back to riding again. But there's more to this than just injuries involved. Now he's having this nightmare, and this nightmare won't stop. He's wondering why he's having this nightmare of the horse and him falling. But we'll pick up more of that next time when we continue with When the Legends Die.